Before I start talking about today, I just wanted to say that this chapter or this section was used by people who did not believe in the authenticity of the Bible to discredit the Bible, because they said there is no pool called Bethesda pool that is existing now. But recent archaeology in the end of the 19th century confirmed that the pool existed, and it had 5 porches. So it was like a pool that was present for hundreds of years. Then they extended it by connecting 2 pools, and then they had like 5 porches which people used to sit on them, and then they had steps to the water. So for those who used to use this section to discredit the Gospel of St. John, they were proven wrong, and the Bible was proven to be not a made-up book. And that was one of the areas that they discredited, and it's proven. And you can look it up in Google. Now, the main point I wanted to talk about today, I'm afraid this section in the story of Jesus' miracles, we know all about it. Jesus comes, there is a paralytic man, and he tells him, stand up, yada yada. Everyone knows that, and we move on. Familiarity makes the story, even when we read it in the Bible, we just gloss over it. But there are few bits here that are a bit peculiar, a bit strange, if you think about it a little bit deeper. Let me give you a demonstration. Let's say you went into the desert in a safari in Morocco on a camel ride, and your camel dropped you, and you're on your own for a day, for 2, for 3, and now you are almost between life and death, and you are desperate for a drink of water. And then, whilst you're just struggling to open your eyes, you see people coming to try. They were looking for you. A search party was called. And then these people come to try to look for you. And then they find you, and you're on the floor. And then the man who is trying to help you just gets a bottle of cold, nice water. And then he starts drinking it in front of you. And then he drops the rest on his face because he's so hot. It's very difficult. And then he looks at you and he say, oh, do you want a drink? How would you feel? How would you feel? I'm not going to point at people, but you can imagine the feeling here. So this is a man who is 38 years, paralyzed, on the floor, helpless. And then this man comes to him in full health, surrounded by fully healthy people, and then says, do you want to be healed? I always struggled with this, but come on, what do you mean? Jesus never said anything superfluous, never came up with a flippant word, and Jesus never was quiet when it was important to say something. So there must be a reason for Jesus to say that. So if we think a little bit deeper, if you ask yourself, what was wrong with this man? Of course, every one of us will say, oh, he was paralytic. But you see, that is not the problem. There were hundreds of miracles that Jesus made. Why would he never ask people, do you want to be healed? There was something more to it than that. I put it to you that this man had another illness that was more serious than his paralysis. I'll give you examples, and I will say why. Firstly, from the discussion that we had when Jesus asked him, do you want to be healed? I mean, I could have said, duh, yeah, I want to be healed. But you can see the way the answer is very strange. He doesn't answer and say yes. He just says, I have no man to throw me in the pool. And then when I'm trying, someone comes in front of me. The man is helpless. The man has no help. He doesn't see himself as potentially in a situation where he can come out of it. So he's helpless, utterly helpless. The second thing about him is that he is a victim. He is you know, he can't do anything to himself. If you listen to what he said, I have no one cares about me. And even when I try to drag myself, my body, someone selfish comes and throws themselves in front of me. You can see the frame of mind here. He's a victim. He is complaining and not happy about his situation. You can hear this in the tone of his voice. He's so self-centered. If you think of, I have no one, when I try, someone comes in front of me. He is just engrossed in what he's in. You think of him as almost frozen in fear. He's just in the fetal position, just like that, with his problem. And he has been doing this for 38 years. Of course, it's unlikely for him to have been thrown there for 38 years, opening his bowels and peeing and being fed there. He must have been taken to a house and someone brings him every day or every few days. They drop him there. 38 years. Was he expecting that he will be healed on the 39th year? On the 40th year? It's just utter helplessness. And that is a condition that this is what we are dealing with. It's not his paralysis. We miss the story. His condition is called in psychology learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. All of us in our lives reach stages of helplessness. We are helpless in things. Things happen to us or to our loved ones that we can't control, and that's life. But there is a horrible situation to be in. It's called learned helplessness. You learn that you're helpless. And that is a situation or adaptation that we end up living with. We look at our problem and we see it huge. It's insurmountable. Then we look at ourselves and we see ourselves very small. And then God disappears from the picture and we reach utter helplessness. There is no way out. That can lead in extreme situations into despair, and it leads into being resistant to change, resistant to ideas, resistant to help, resistant to any advice, and even leads to being ungrateful or disloyal. This man proved this. I mean, you can see the story. Everything is written in the Bible for a reason. He didn't know who Jesus was. Jesus healed him and walked away. And then the Jews told him, you can't do that. You're carrying your stuff. That's in the Sabbath. He said, well, the man who told me, carry it. He's still throwing the blame on someone. He is not grateful to the man who healed him. He's just, let him take the flak for that. And worse than that, he eventually knew that it was Jesus, because Jesus meets him in the temple and he says, don't sin again or you will have worse. So he knows it's Jesus. So what he does, he goes back to the Pharisees and tells on him. And in a way, he puts Jesus in trouble. Why would he do that? And if you think about it, it doesn't make sense, but it makes sense if we understand his mental status. He was in this situation of utter despair and learned helplessness, that you become almost ungrateful and you don't care about anyone. And that's a horrible situation. Am I making that up? No. You see it in the Bible. You see it in the Israelites. The Israelites were in Egypt for 400 years, and they were in horrible situation. And they cried out of despair, but they were helpless. There's no way out. They looked at themselves. They are very weak. Egypt was the strongest empire at that time. Pharaoh was on top of them. He is picking up their boys and killing them, and he is in control. And they cry to God, but they don't really believe in God, as we would see in their journey after that. So what happens? God comes to them because they are helpless, like what God did here. God comes to the man. If Christ wouldn't have come to the man, he would have stayed there. So God comes to them, God sends them Moses, and then they whinge. For 40 years they keep whinging and they keep moving away from God, and they keep saying, no, we actually want to go back. We'd prefer to eat the food in Egypt rather than being here. We are hungry, we are thirsty. And that explains the whinging and the complaining. Exactly the same. Helpless, they are victims, they are complaining all the time, they are frozen in the past, they don't want to move forward. How about ourselves? Many of us, and I am before all of you, are frozen in things. Addiction. Many of us are addicted to things. I'm not going to talk about pornography and gambling and the obvious things. We are addicted to our mobile phones and our tablets and our games and our things. How much time do we spend on it, and how much time do we spend on thinking or praying or being with God? Sin. We are addicted to sins. Every one of us has got their one or more sins. We have got the lovely story of Saint Maria today. She was so addicted to sin that she just lived it, and she moved to Jerusalem to just sin in Jerusalem. And as happened with the Israelites and with this man, God knew she was helpless on her own. So he comes to her. And the way God came to her is that when she tried to enter into the church, she was prevented. And then she thought there is something strange there. And eventually she realized she is not worthy, and God spoke to her, and this is his way of bringing her into him. So, sin, relationships. How many of us are in broken relationships? I'm not talking about people who divorce and people who are separated. I'm talking about people who are living together in a broken, unhappy marriage. Why? Because we marry, taking marriage as an example. Everything in society now is transactional. We are taught from childhood that we need to put effort, and you put this, you get that. You do this, you did do that. Everything is transactional. At work, it's transactional. So you get married or you marry transactionally. You will do this for me, I will do that for you, and it runs like this. But of course, like any transaction, one wants to get more than what they put in. So then you start to have this hidden or unhidden fight for more power or more control. And eventually people end up colliding, and eventually many people run almost like tracks. You know, when you see the train tracks, two tracks parallel to each other, everyone is living their own lives in a state of Cold War. But neither is fulfilled. And that's sad, because their children will imbibe this, and their children will think that's the way to live. And the church should have two people who are madly in love with each other. They have Christ gelling them together, and they get closer and closer into becoming one. And this is why there are many sad stories in our church these days, because we see marriage as transactional. Children and their parents, they see each other as transactional. As a child, I'm expecting my parents to do this, that, and that. It's transactional. I'm not expected to. It's all. And if they don't give me what I want, then starts the fight. And then eventually one party becomes helpless. It's a state of utter helplessness. But there is a beautiful, beautiful verse in Psalm 81:6. Please remember 81:6. Go and read it. It's called, I'll read it for you. I removed his shoulder from the burden. And his hands were freed from the basket. So God is trying to remove my shoulders from under the burden that is that is I am struggling with. God doesn't want us to be in that situation. God doesn't want me to be helpless. So what does God do in a situation like this? What can he do for my helplessness? Firstly, he comes to me. When God sees me in my helplessness, he will not leave me in my helplessness. He will come to me because I'm just stood there, not able to do anything. And I'm afraid to move because if I move, I'm worried that I might make it worse. If I speak to my spouse and tell them, look, I'm not fulfilled or I'm sorry about what I have done, I'm worried that it will make things worse. I'm worried that if I speak to my son or my daughter about our gap, they will run away from the house. I'm afraid, I'm afraid, I'm afraid. So then at these situations, God comes. He came to the Israelites, he came to Maryam, the Egyptian. He comes to the paralytic man and he engaged him in a discussion. And why does he do that? He wants to lift my eyes from my problem onto him. And once one lifts one's eyes into Jesus, one would realize I'm not that helpless actually. I am part of the big body of Christ. I'm his body. And it's a beautiful, we'll talk about it today for our guys at Sunday school. When Jesus appeared to Paul, and Paul said, "Who are you, sir?" And then Jesus said, "I am Christ, whom you persecute." Well, when did Jesus get persecuted by Paul? Jesus is up in heaven. He's been ascended by then. But he considered anything that was done to his people, done to him. So effectively, God is saying, this is my man. If you touch him, you touch me. What is better than that? How can I be helpless when I realize I'm his man, I'm his woman for women? So we are his people. He would not allow us to be in that helplessness. So it's very important frame of mind to be in. That sad, helpless man had a more serious disease than his legs. His serious disease was here, and he needed healing of that. And many of us have that weakness. And we need God's help. So he comes to us. He will come to you as he came to this man and to the Israelites, and he will come to us, but we have to listen to him. And he would refocus my attention to him, but I would need to listen to him. I would need to understand that he may do things in a way that I don't know. They call it the third way. He has his way. It may not be something that I've ever thought of, but I have to be obedient to him. So, in summary, the story is not about paralytic man that suddenly was made pure. The story about a helpless man in utter learned helplessness. The story is for me and for you, for us to realize that God doesn't want us to be in that helplessness. God wants us to look at him, not look at our weaknesses, not look at our bullies, not look at our broken relationships, but to look at him and try through him to shout and say, help me. On the opposite of that story here, you have got Bartimaeus, the blind man. And this man was a blind man, sat there, and he knew Jesus was passing because he heard some commotion. And he said, well, what's going on? They said, Jesus is passing. And he kept shouting, Jesus, and he called him Son of David, and he kept shouting, and then Jesus called him, and he asked him the same question, what do you want me to do for you? But he had a ready answer. Sir, I want to be healed. I want to see. In the Bible it says, Rabbi, I want to see. Clear answer, and he was made clear. So we need to have this spirit with the help of God. So God does not want me to be helpless. God will come to me in my helplessness. God will remind me that I am not helpless because I am part of him, and God will give me the strength. God will give me solution. God will give me people to help me come out of it. And glory be to God.